Every day I employ the dialect of untamed hurricanes. I speak the madness of opposing winds. Every evening I use the patois of furious rains. I speak the rage of overflowing waters. Every night I speak to the islands of the Caribbean in the language of hysterical storms. I speak the madness of the sea in heat. Dialect of hurricanes, patois of rains, language of storms, unfolding of life in a spiral.
These striking words are from Haitian writer Frank Etienne, known as the father of Haitian letters. His novel, Ready to Burst, translated here by Kayama Glover, challenges us to rethink our understanding of space and time. Are we bound to repeat certain cycles? What could we do differently if we, like water, had the power to create new patterns?
Dialect of hurricanes, patois of rains, language of storms, unfolding of life in a spiral.
Welcome back to Season 4 of Tomorrow is the Problem, an ICA Miami Art and Research Center podcast. I'm your host, Donna Honagbiche. This season, we foreground Haiti's influence on Miami, the city that the ICA calls home, by exploring and engaging with Haitian communities in close proximity to the museum and the diasporas that inform them. As we host Haitian artists within the walls of the ICA and explore our own role as curators at the museum, which is a neighbor to Miami's Haitian American communities, we look outward to the political, cultural, and aesthetic worlds that inform artistic practices, and inward to our own identities and questions.
I think that there is some affective, emotional, visceral benefit to the so-called first world in understanding itself as distinct from the so-called third world. And in order to make sure that distinction holds and holds fast, there is an more or less intentional need and tendency to exceptionalize the third world as a place of disaster, catastrophe, suffering, misery, and extremes.
You only have to get on Twitter or open a newspaper to see it. The trope of Haiti in crisis. The paternalistic narrative that Haiti is a poor, beleaguered nation, unable to get its footing in the Western Hemisphere, is pervasive and damaging in many ways, seen and unseen. As Haitian novelist Edwidge Danticat has said, Haiti is a place that suffers so much from neglect that people only want to hear about it when it's at its extreme. And that's what they end up knowing about it. We'll hear more from Danticat later in the episode.
The future for Haiti, the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere, is still uncertain.
Haiti has been plagued for decades by natural disasters and political turmoil. Last year, President Jovenel Moïse was assassinated and another deadly earthquake hit, throwing the country into chaos.
But Haiti is much more than the rhetoric of crisis that surrounds it. It is the home of 11 million people who lead resilient lives and celebrate their unique heritage in ways that are not necessarily covered by the latest headlines. Those of us who live in Miami in particular are well aware of nuanced and often beautiful diasporic experiences and how these serve as inflection points for understanding Haiti itself. Haitian writers and artists draw on a rich, multi-layered aesthetic and cultural history. This informs and enriches the country's cultural output, but it also serves as a jumping-off point for imagining alternative futures. In the face of centuries of intervention, what do Haitians, both in the diaspora and at home, want for their country? What does the future of Haiti look like? New futures don't come into being out of nowhere. They have to be wrestled from the grips of the past and tussle with the present. Who is included, isolated in, or cut out of the story of Haiti? This challenge might include a struggle to pinpoint when exactly Haitian history begins. And who gets to tell the story of the island of Hispaniola, today shared by Haiti and the Dominican Republic?
I mean, I have to put it in long perspective. Disaster capitalism, you could say, begins with the arrival of Christopher Columbus, what he called Hispaniola. In 1493, he returned with his sons and created a colony in the place that is now Haiti.
It's a poem that American schoolchildren learn by heart. In 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. What may be less familiar is what came after, what sets the stage for the drama of the Haitian Revolution, and the contemporary saga of Haiti's quest for economic self-determination. The exploitation of moments of crisis for economic or political gain, so-called disaster capitalism, may feel familiar to Floridians or Haitians during hurricane season, but it has a long and damaging history on the island.
And that moment of entry of capitalism into the New World, because it was through the creation of sugar plantations, which was his family business. So that was a disaster for the Taino people, for the enslaved African people, for the African communities left depopulated. So those people of the Caribbean have been living with disaster capitalism for a long time.
This is Mimi Scheller. She's the dean of the Global School of Worcester Polytechnic Institute and previously the founding director of the Center for Mobilities Research and Policy at Drexel University. Her work centers on mobility studies in the Caribbean.
So when I began studying the Caribbean region, it's quickly apparent that it's a region of multiple kinds of mobility and immobility. And that's what the field of mobilities research is about, the power relations and the inequalities in terms of who can move, who determines movement, who is able to stay in place, who is able to dwell or remain somewhere, and the way in which some people's mobilities impact others, displace others. You can think of how tourism might displace people from access to a shoreline or a beach. You can think about how highway building displaced certain kinds of communities across the urban United States, racialized communities, and other ways in which mobilities and immobilities are a power relation.
Migration and mass movement has shaped Haiti in many ways. Through the displacement of indigenous people, the arrival and expulsion of colonists, the forced migration of enslaved people, the relocation of Haitians in the diaspora. Movement in Haiti today is no less complex. Who can leave Haiti and when? Who can return? In times of disaster, who loses, who gains by restrictions on mobility?
Good evening. The president of Haiti said today that his country is destroyed.
An absolute catastrophe unfolding right now in Haiti the coming hours.
Many are worrying that Haiti is teetering on the brink of yet another disaster, a second wave of deaths triggered by infectious diseases spread among quake survivors living in makeshift housing.
After the 2010 earthquake in Haiti, what we saw was an effort to keep the victims in place there. The immediate response of the United States was to send military ships and to drop announcements and flyers telling people, do not leave, do not try to take to small boats, remain in place. You know, the U.S. immediately took over the airport and controlled airspace of what flights could come and go. And what that meant was that only a small number of people who already had passports and who already had visas were able to temporarily fly out and get to places like Florida, come to Miami, and that makes it basically accessible only to the wealthy or to the privileged. So most of the victims of that earthquake, and subsequently we see this with hurricanes, are kept in place in those camps that came to be called internally displaced people's camps, IDP camps, and the people became called IDPs, which is a very dehumanizing way of thinking of people who are the victims of this earthquake or this hurricane that happens.
Scheller says that Haiti's isolation, past and present, is no accident, but is part of the grim dynamic that may feel familiar to anyone who has studied the nation's history.
Think about the isolation and the containment of Haiti of originating in the backlash to the Haitian Revolution. So we have to start, right, with the 1790s, the Haitian Revolution, the independence of Haiti in 1804. And it's that radical vision of democracy and freedom for all people that the slaveholding powers sought to contain. And they didn't want it to get out in the world because it threatened the entire economy that was based on slavery and on plantations. So that containment of Haiti has continued over the centuries since then.
That containment can take many forms: economic tariffs, complex immigration proceedings, and even, seemingly paradoxically on an island, a border wall. Haiti occupies the western portion of the island of Hispaniola and shares a land border with the Dominican Republic.
So there's been times when there's been a border with many perforations in it, right? Lots of flows back and forth. But under the current government in the Dominican Republic, there was an effort to tighten that border, right? And to stop those flows back and forth. Unless they could show that their grandparents had been there before 1929, I believe it is, they could be denied their birthright citizenship in the Dominican Republic and instead be considered the children of foreign nationals. And so that's led to the current situation where tens of thousands of Dominicans of Haitian descent have been denationalized and lost their citizenship rights.
For further learning on this, Miami-based Dominican artist Chara Oquet has done a great deal of work with the communities who live on the DR-Haiti border. This issue in the Dominican Republic and along the border has vast implications in Haiti today. When we spoke with Haitian writer Edwidge Danticat for our first season, she illustrated just how unpredictable new Dominican laws may affect Haitian Dominicans. The sense of unease she describes is compounded by the shifting realities of climate change.
There are people who have lived in the Dominican Republic all their lives who are suddenly told by a law that if you didn't have a grandmother who was Dominican, by our definition, you can't no longer stay here. So that precarity, right, of migration, which I think there will be more and more people feeling over the years to come, driven certainly by climate. But that precarity is strong. It's very strong for a lot of us. It's very real.
Questions of belonging, of nationality, and birthright are hotly contested in contemporary Haiti. The ongoing crisis along the Dominican border is just one example of attempts from the outside to control or constrain patterns of immigration, compounded by internal conflict on the same subject. But Haiti is more than a political football, tossed from power to power, an assertion of self-determination, of the right of its citizens to move freely in the world would be a radical break. Particularly as the realities of climate change make themselves clear, a new paradigm becomes more and more essential. Can we reframe our ideas of mobility to maximize a flexible response in the future? Rather than a steady stream of outward migration, can we create new patterns of movement that encourage a return, a circling back?
We're starting to talk about the concept of climate mobilities, and there's many different kinds of climate mobilities. And so the idea is to get away from this sort of fearful discourse that there's going to be this wave of climate migrants who are going to inundate the United States or other more resilient places in the world because all of these impoverished masses are going to be displaced by climate disasters. Instead, if we think about climate mobilities, we see that many people move around and have always moved around for various reasons, some of which are climate related, some of which are for work, sometimes for family, for business, for tourism. There are many people and things always moving, especially in this Caribbean region. And so we can think of resilience as how can we allow for Caribbean mobilities to continue in a resilient mode? And how can people in different parts of the region and in their diaspora help each other in the face of a disaster, which is what they've always done? So if someone temporarily needed to move and maybe be in a safer space, maybe work and earn a little bit of money, but they still want to go back to their home, we should make that more possible for people to do that.
Think of the coiled spires of seashells, particularly the conch shells that wash ashore in the warm climate of the Caribbean. Now picture the same spiral as the eye of a storm, gathering power as it travels along the water. An oral storytelling tradition may follow the same route, doubling back on itself, making sure listeners understand the pattern. For writers like Frank Etienne, who we heard at the top of the episode, there is much to be gained from returning to the spiral, especially as a way to understand time.
In the Haitian context, we see in the visual landscape the repetition of the spiral, not only in the creative arts, but in the actual cultural reality. And I'm thinking notably about the spiral that weaves around the central pillar in a Vodou peristyle, which is a Vodou temple, for example. So there's that kind of physical representation of the spiral in contemporary life.
This is Kayama Glover, professor of French and Africana Studies at Barnard College of Columbia University. Glover's writing and translation work focuses on the spiralist movement in Haiti, which she sees as a way to understand Haiti's history, particularly in the 20th century as well as its future.
This notion of the form of the spiral being about repetition with a difference, right? So rehearsing in some ways similar phenomena, but always with a slight, you can call it evolution, let's say, seemed to me an apt way to puzzle through some of the more frustrating elements of Haiti's history. So to keep it in that tight frame of wending back along itself, we have to remember that there are these imposing forces pulling it in both directions. And that too seemed metaphorically and very literally to describe Haiti's reality. So notably, they were writing in the 1960s through the 1990s, which is also a period, as anyone who knows Haiti knows, is a particularly fraught era, as it comprises the two successive dictatorships of François Papa-Doc Duvalier and Jean-Claude Baby Doc Duvalier. This period between 1957, when François Papa-Doc took the presidency, to 1986, when Jean-Claude Baby Doc Duvalier was ousted in a coup, is notorious as a brutal period of state repression of the citizenry.
En œuvrant pour son renversement, soit que cette combinaison machiavélique.
Et voilà, ça y est. Le président vient de faire son entrée, vient de faire son apparition sur le balcon du Palais national. La foule compacte applaudit. Il va délivrer son message.
Glover describes the Duvalier era as a state entrenched against its own people. In order to survive, the spiralist writers evolved a unique style. Frank Etienne, René Philoct, and Jean-Claude Pignol, among others, wrote in and around that violence, wrapping it formally in oblique but vivid language that is almost more powerful because of what it does not say.
During the successive Duvalier dictatorships, writers, artists, women, children, school teachers, sports directors, no one was spared the wrath of the government. Everyone was a potential enemy of the state and thus could be met with extraordinary violence. Really, anyone could be deemed a threat. So to write in Haiti in the 1960s, 70s, through the 80s was an incredibly risky affair. It is for this reason that so many of Haiti's writers from that generation ended up going into exile. The spiralists did not go into exile. The spiralists made this determination to stay. And so arguably part of what might be thought of as the formal complexity of their work has to do with their efforts to stay under the radar, to make their critiques oblique, to write in ways that wouldn't trigger alarm or the wrath of the government.
Faced with political repression, working within the tight bounds of a small and suddenly isolated community, the spiralists turned to their own history in order to write, and in Frank Etienne's case, even sing their way out of their present.
What these writers seem committed most to doing is finding innovative, personal ways of telling the story of the present, intimate stories of the present, let's say, that necessarily call up the past. Right? The present is bound to an unresolved past that stretches all the way back, certainly, to 1804 and the cardinal sin Haiti committed by seizing independence well before the West was ready for that, right? But that also necessarily moves through events in history that are tied to that past and that will continue to inflect the present. And I'm thinking about the Marine occupation of Haiti from 1915 to 1934 and what that meant in terms of the United States taking over the Haitian debt and making Haiti beholden economically to its neighbor to the north. I'm thinking about the peacekeeping missions of the United Nations and the United States that have done as much harm as good, if not more harm than good, in Haiti.
By circling back through collective memory, spotting motifs of global domination and the struggle for self-sovereignty, these writers challenge us still today to confront our roles in the repetition of historical patterns. Their work was a commentary on the repression of their times, but it can also encourage creative rule-breaking of all kinds.
This reflects why The Spiral has been so appealing to me, because I feel like it helps me refuse that neat distinction of blocks of time and history, as if we can have some remove from the past, fully inhabit the present, and then, daintily imagine the future or warily imagine the future. The Spiral helps me keep those three arbitrary constructs in constant conversation.
For all the spiralists wrote in and around their political constraints, they also provide another model for us: communal joy. Their work can be playful as well as disorienting, embracing pluralistic readings and multiple interpretations. And at the heart of these works is a cultural celebration. Frank Etienne would read his work aloud to his neighbors, inviting them into conversation. Blurring the lines between art and life, this literature offers us alternative ways of understanding our worlds. Here's Frank Etienne performing his work.
Et puis avec des ombres qui sont là partout, peut-être aussi à côté, de l'autre côté, que ce soit à gauche ou à droite, peut-être des cadavres, peut-être des morts, des ombres. C'est pour aller. Dosuma sam vin chercher, c'est pour n'aller. Cimetière pas loin.
For many of us who write about Haiti, who are Haitian, who teach about Haiti, who think about Haiti, is that we're looking for answers to problems, right? Like the problems we can see, how do we solve them? And I think the temptation can be to look to works by Haiti's artists and writers for answers, right? For what should we do? Like, you've given us what's wrong, what would be right? And as satisfying and wonderful as that would be, if these novels and other, forms of cultural production, if they would give us those answers at the end of the day, few of them do. I think what they're asking for that would produce alternative futures is to be heard.
The desire to be heard and acknowledged is, of course, not limited to artistic expression, but has much wider cultural applicability in Haiti and beyond. Scheller reminds us that, in times of crisis, local knowledge can be more effective than outside intervention because local aid is responding in real time to the needs of the community. For Scheller, the 2010 earthquake was a stark reminder of this distinction.
There were many organizations within Haiti, many community-based and grassroots organizations, and the entire disaster response effort ignored them and excluded them in many ways. And many of those small organizations had closer links and connections with the affected people, and they had their own understanding of their needs and the pace at which things could be done. And yet, again, the small organizations, the ones closest to affected communities, often don't have the social capital, the sort of know-how to fill out the bureaucratic forms, to get the funding. And so it's other outside organizations that will come in and sort of take over disaster response. And so we really need to rethink how we're reacting in those moments, to listen to the people who are affected and to support their own self-organizing, their own capacity to identify what they would like and what they need and how they want to do it. And part of that can include radical visions of alternative ways of doing things. And that's what the entire, what we call the NGO industrial complex, doesn't always want to recognize.
Solutions for a climate crisis may require a turn to older ways of being, where the long historical line of farming in Haiti can circle back to itself, spiraling back to past methods with an eye to a more expansive and gentler future.
And so what we see in Puerto Rico, in Haiti, in other places that have been hit with hurricanes recently, is an effort to kind of rebuild community-based resilience through things like small farming, agroecological movements, food sovereignty movements, communal kind of collectives. There's an alternative way of living, of thriving, of being resilient that has been created over this 400-year period by people in the Caribbean. And sometimes in the aftermath of these hurricanes, what happens is a re-energizing, a return to those movements and forms of resistance to the extractive capitalist exploitation of people in the Caribbean. The deep histories of resistance movements and radical political, social political movements and cultural movements in the Caribbean are what people often turn to be resilient and to survive those disasters.
As part of the Caribbean region, culturally as well as geographically, South Florida could embrace a similar approach to resilience. In fact, many Miamians already have. Local food and native gardening movements are gaining momentum, and permaculture farms are springing up in Little Haiti. These are actions with immediate benefits to locals, of course, but they also hope to serve as anchor points for a community in transition, or potentially in crisis. These methods draw on much older systems of agriculture and land stewardship, and there is much to be gained from stewarding ancestral wisdom and listening across borders to contend with the impending climate crisis, particularly for those on the front lines of the crisis, geographically situated in low-lying areas. Here's Dantakat again.
We can't help but connect the sea to the climate, to whatever's coming ahead for us. Of course, that's the first sign, but also to see the precarity of that life for certain people who make their lives from the sea. I think they will be on the front lines of the climate situation for the world. So I think that's also a way of thinking about the future of like the way that in a very real day-to-day way that life meets whatever the climate has in store for us next, and people who live in low-lying areas near the sea, especially vulnerable people in the developing world, will be most affected by this.
Haiti's origins were a literal call to arms, and its potential impact on global currents is no different. The revolutionary spirit lives on and deserves, even demands, an audience.
One of the most extraordinary things I found about particular authors in Haiti is the insistent way in which they're speaking well into the world beyond their borders. They're talking to the world. And they're hoping that folks are paying attention. Haitian literature has always been global literature because Haiti is global. Because no matter what efforts have been made to limit, constrain, isolate, disregard, or discount this country, there's no way around the fact that it's a building block of the American hemisphere and therefore of the wider imperial world.
Haiti has always been a place of movement, a crossroads for many cultural threads. Its overlapping stories collapse our understanding of past and present, and this creativity can also inform our future. At ICA Miami, curators are working to reckon with these challenging histories and examine our own role in breaking patterns of extraction and exotifying non-white cultures. It is an ongoing process.
Pour semer l'espoir. Ezili, nanano. Ezili, nanano.
This song, performed by the Haitian singer Toto Bicent, is called Ezili. In Haitian voodoo, Ezili is the term for female goddesses, the most famous of which is Ezili Danto.
For me, Ezili Danto represents the protection of the world by mothers and the protection of children and a sense of anger at the violence. And she's become a kind of protector and brings that kind of energy of a mother's righteousness and a mother's care and a mother's anger, all of those things.
Ezili Danto's righteous spirit commands an audience, making space for the most vulnerable who are under her special protection. Bicent's song enjoins reverence and a rethinking of who speaks for Haiti and why.
If you think about Haiti as a space that has been silenced in so many ways by so many forces, global, local, regional, and other, the desire to be heard and the insistence on being heard is an alternative future because it hasn't been the case in the past or in the present. So the very idea of having these stories appear in the world, those are alternative futures already. Though they may not prescribe, what those futures exactly will look like, they understand, I think, that those futures are contingent on acknowledgement of Haiti's present and past.
Join us next time when we'll discuss Haitian artist Hervé Telemaque and his enduring legacy as part of the Caribbean and global modernist movement. Tomorrow is the Problem is produced in partnership with Podfly Productions. This episode was written and produced by Thea Piltsecker and me, Donna Honar-Piché, in collaboration with Wilkin Brutus. Our executive producer is Jocelyn Aram. Our recording engineer is Carle Reem Neal. Our sound designer is Nina Pollack. Special thanks to Mimi Scheller and Kayama Glover for joining us on the show, and to Edwidge Dantacat for joining us last season. Our music for this episode includes Mika Ben's Haiti Se and Toto Bicent's Ezili. I'm Donna Honar-Piché. Thanks for listening.